Palestine news.
So our first, well, not first, but our second story tonight. So like I said, last week we talked about how Columbia University is rich enough to give reparations to their Jewish staff in terms of the anti-Semitism that they experienced on campus, allegedly. Yeah, so, but we have seen just generally how, especially with the Ivy League schools, how they have kind of cartel to Israel, that they're doing basically a lot of stuff, just, yeah, they're definitely being pro-Israel. So, so you might be wondering why that is the case. So Reef brought me this article like a couple of weeks ago, and I think in light of the story that we did talk about regarding Colombia last week, I think, again, one, it's more of a continuation of that, but two, I think this will kind of give you guys some insight as to why U.S. universities are seemingly kind of doubling down on their relationship. Not all, but you can argue like many of the big universities that especially seemingly the Ivy Leagues, are kind of going, like, really doubling down on their support of Israel, even though they may not say that verbally. They are definitely in terms of not even just money, but resources. So, so you pulled up the story from Israel Palestine News. I guess it was also reported on in Plus 972.
Yeah. Which you got to be careful with 972 because they are Israeli, which that it can be a little like they're okay, but it's like sometimes you gotta, because I have one from 972 later tonight, and you'll see what I mean, where it's like, there's they tend to have something in there that you can catch, but
right,
like continue.
But well, we can kind of get into that if
there is
those in chat, you can kind of catch.
Sometimes it's
anything.
just
I didn't think so.
Fear-mongery, like I've seen from them, where it's like they put out information just to scare the normal people who are paying attention,
Sure.
But we'll see. We've reported their stuff before.
I don't think it gives that, but as when I read it, but but we'll see. And let us know in your chat what you guys think. So this was written by Dikla, Taylor-Sheinman, and Georgia Gee. And they write, after crushing Dissent, given the protests that we've seen in relation to Gaza on college campuses this past year, U.S. universities are deepening ties with Israeli academia. Israeli universities regularly collaborate with the military, which has destroyed all academic life in Gaza. We know this. That's done nothing to slow U.S.-Israeli partnerships, which we also know and have reported extensively on that. So actually, can you zoom in, because that's a little small?
Yeah. How's that?
Okay, actually, I have to come up. That's a little better. Thank you. At the end of July, Harvard signaled its willingness to spend as much as $500 million. Let me say that again. $500 million. Billion dollars.
With a B.
Jeez. To settle accusations of anti-Semitism brought by the Trump administration. While the scandal and the staggering sum has drawn widespread attention, a previous concession slipped under the radar. In a failed bid to placate the administration earlier this year, Harvard agreed to establish a formal partnership with an Israeli university. On July 28th, Harvard announced 2 new initiatives with Israeli institutions: a study abroad program with Ben-Gurion University in the Negev, and a postdoctoral fellowship for Israel scientists at Harvard Medical School. The move comes amid a wave of universities launching or expanding partnerships with their Israeli counterparts in recent months. In December, MIT launched a program that will allow scholars at Israel's 9 public, state-accredited universities to come to MIT for collaboration and training. In March, Clemson University in South Carolina announced a partnership with Hebrew University and Spahir College to bring new agricultural technologies to Israel's greater Negev region. And Columbia University committed to expanding its academic initiatives with Tel Aviv University. And in May, the University of Utah signed an academic cooperation deal with Ariel University, an Israeli institution located in an illegal West Bank settlement. So I have something to say right here. It seems that a lot of these partnerships are tied to the Greater Israel plan, so to speak. You know, you need to have people to be able to, like, agriculture, tech. You're going to need people who are able to be experts in those fields, especially if you're looking to wipe out,
right,
like Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Syria, you know, essentially clean house in the region and then kind of cultivate it into their, I'll say, their paradise, so to speak. So you're going to need the tech and the know-how in order to do that. So that's kind of where I kind of feel this is kind of leading to, and why these partnerships are very important. So this is essentially kind of,
we've covered places like King's College, and you know, if you go back to our we covered an Alan McLeod thing about, you know, London schools being essentially just you know, they funnel, it's like two-way street. Not only do they go and get military adjuncts to come in and teach curriculum, right? They then start pulling all these kids up through the, you know, Langley ladder to intelligence and military and because it's like they need both. They need you brainwashed, but then they also need that brainwashed brain to do stuff for them. So,
right,
you know, but which we've covered that here. We've covered them, you know, they go straight to universities here and recruit. Very, very commonplace for them to try and get, you know, bodies. So,
right.
But yeah,
let's continue. But yeah, just wanted to say that because I made that. I think it's very easy to kind of make that connection, and in terms of what we've discussed before. You can actually zoom out a little bit. There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you. Meanwhile, Harvard recently suspended its research partnership with Dissent, I guess how you say it, University, the largest Palestinian university in the West Bank. And in Gaza, all 12 universities have been destroyed by Israel's genocide on the Strip. We call it scholasticide, said Dr. Wessam Amir, formerly the Dean of the Faculty of Communications and Languages at Gaza University. It refers to Israel's systematic and deliberate destruction of education as a tool of domination. As U.S. universities deepen ties with Israel's institutions, a new comprehensive Hebrew language report by New Profile, an Israeli anti-militarization project movement, sheds light on the extent to which those institutions are embedded in the country's military apparatus, with Israel expanding its assault on Gaza and spiraling settler and army violence throughout the West Bank. The report identifies that at least 57 military academic programs for active duty soldiers and conscription candidates across numerous universities, and estimates that financial cooperation between the Ministry of Defense and academia for soldier study programs from 2019 to 2022 exceeded, I'm not sure of the currency there, but roughly $79 million.
Would be shekels.
So essentially, this is, I don't think that's shekels. If you know that currency, let us know in the chat. But it, as I said, it correlates to roughly $80 million. So basically, so
the new
IDF
Israeli
soldiers,
shekel. That is what it is.
Oh, it is? Okay. So basically, IDF soldiers, mind you, are able to get educated on essentially our dime, because that's where a lot of this money is coming from. But we cannot offer higher education here.
No.
For our students here.
No, they got to earn their bootstraps to pull themselves up by. You know?
Well, except they are wearing the bootstraps and they're killing people. So,
yep. Similar to how you can only get that here if you go through the military. Then you get you free college, right? You know?
Well, yeah, that's what happens here too. But it's like, but that's kind of the focus is that you have to work in the military in order to get some type of perk. And that shouldn't necessarily, I mean, I get it, but that shouldn't be the only industry.
If you want productive members of society, you might give that to everyone, not the ones you traumatize in war. But
right. So anyway, let's continue. The 7 Israeli universities named in the report, including Hebrew University and Tel Aviv University, are active partners in the ongoing occupation of the West Bank and Israel's genocide. Nisi Palil, the report's author, told Plus 972. Academia in the United States should set some basic moral standards as a condition for interinstitutional partnerships. At the very least, this should include requiring Israeli academic institutions to end their cooperation with Israel's military establishment and industry. Israeli universities have long enjoyed a reputation in the West as multicultural, pluralistic institutions with robust academic freedom. As Maya Wind, a scholar of Israeli militarism and the author of the 2024 book, can you zoom in? It's hard to see that.
Yeah.
Towers of Ivory and Steel notes, this view has been echoed by groups like Freedom House and the Varieties of Democracy Institute, as well as universities themselves. Columbia University describes campus life at Tel Aviv University, with whom it offers a dual degree program, as dynamic and pluralistic. Yet, according to Wind, the reality is much more troubling. Israeli universities are in fact deeply implicated with Israeli settler colonialism and now in genocide, she told Plus 972. This Western consensus is one Palestinians have long questioned. Indeed, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel issued its call to boycott Israeli universities back in 2004, a full year before the BDS movement was launched. The campaign advanced the claim that Israeli academic institutions and the majority of Israeli intellectuals have either contributed directly to sustaining Israel's systems of oppression or being complicit through their silence. And again, it's not just Israel that's done this. We have done this here. Harvard in particular, and we reported about this maybe about 2 years ago, how they, they essentially made eugenics a thing in terms of the oppression that Black people and especially have experienced here. So this is kind of the danger of, and I know you agree with this, with academia, is that overtly academia influences policy in terms of our government. So you've seen this with Israel, but we also have done that in terms of academia, and you're seeing this more directly in terms of now, you're not allowed to talk about Palestine. A lot more of these Israeli groups are being more prolific now. If anything, they're expanding more, to try to, and it will talk about it in the article later, to kind of bring the Hasbara, or at least the pro-Israeli sentiment, towards U.S. universities. And U.S. universities are not necessarily pushing back on that. If they are, not so well, but generally, they're not. So this is what makes it very dangerous in terms of trying to increase pro-Israeli sentiment, which not sure if it's working or not sure if it's going to work, but the effort is definitely being made by the Israeli government with the help of our educational systems here in US. But anyway, Wynn's book, based on extensive archival and ethnographic research in Israel, only bolsters AICBI's assessment of Israeli academia. Entire academic disciplines, she argues, subordinate their knowledge production to the needs of an Israeli state. One example is the, I'm going to mispronounce it, is the Havatzalat program, housed in Hebrew University's Department of Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies, which integrates academic study with military intelligence training. Many of its graduates go on to serve in Unit 8200, Israel's elite surveillance corps. This information they collect is often used to prosecute Palestinians in military courts or coerce collaboration with the Shin Bet, Israel's internal security agency. Middle Eastern studies is hardly the only field where academic expertise is mobilized in service of Israeli state interests, particularly its military campaigns. Israeli universities have also helped construct legal frameworks that reinterpret international humanitarian law to shield the state from accountability. Probably, again, what we're seeing with the ICJ right now. And we'll probably get more into that, more especially with the segment I will talk about later. Probably not directly, but you can see some of that kind of placed in a more religious way, so to speak. At Tel Aviv's University Institute for National Security Studies, academics work closely with security officers to produce legal justifications for Israeli military operations, including arguments that traditional laws of war are ill-suited for Israel's war on terror. One such innovation is the term third population, referring to individuals who appear to be civilians but might interfere with military objectives, a category used to erode the legal distinction between combatant and non-combatant, effectively permitting the targeting of Palestinian civilians. There's going to be years of research to understand how the Israeli society carried out a genocide and got away with it for as long as it did, Wynn said. To understand how we got to this point, it's not enough to look at the military. You have to look at the kinds of institutions that we don't tend to look at when we think of state and colonial violence. No institution in Israel is untouched by the occupation, and Israeli universities are no exception. Among Israel's 9 state-recognized universities, one stands out for its egregiously blatant violations of international law. One of the first Israeli academic institutions in the occupied West Bank, Ariel University was established in 1982 as the Judea and Samaria Academic College, an outpost of Bar Ilan University. The university is located in the settlement of Ariel, which itself was founded just 4 years earlier, envisioned by its planners as a secular urban hub in the heart of the West Bank, close to the Israeli military industries where many of its residents worked. Ariel University is not just built on occupied Palestinian land, with an explicit mission to instill a sense of belonging to the State of Israel and advance Zionist values, according to its president. The institution has also given academic credit to students who volunteer with Hashomer Yosh, a former U.S.-sanctioned volunteer youth organization whose settler members have committed violence against Palestinian communities in the West Bank. I call on everyone to support them like we do here at Ariel University, said Mark Zell, an American lawyer and board chairman at Ariel, in a 2020 video to promote the youth group. A spokesperson from Ariel University said it has no relationship with Hashomer Yosh, and statements made by private individuals do not represent official U.S. university policy. Yeah, right. At least 8 U.S. universities, including Johns Hopkins, and Florida Atlantic University, have established relationships with Ariel. In 2019, according to its nonprofit financial disclosures, Bernard College donated $13,500 directly to Ariel University for a scientific project. And in June, Ariel and the University of Utah signed a 5-year memorandum of understanding that establishes a framework of joint research projects, student and faculty exchanges, and shared academic conferences. Its announcement, first reported by the Jerusalem Post, came as a shock to some of Utah's faculty. Marshall Steinbaum, assistant professor of economics, told Plus 972 that they learned about the partnership from the article. There was no word of it on campus at all, Steinbaum said. They think people won't get organized because it's the summer, but we will not just stop agitating for the cancellation of the MOU. Sneaky, sneaky.
Yeah.
In a press release published after the announcement, the University of Utah Faculty for Justice in Palestine, in which Steinbaum is a member, noted that any academic cooperation between the universities would be a violation of Utah state and U.S. federal laws, which prohibit higher education institutions from taking positions on matters of public controversy or discriminating on the basis of religion or national origin. Because Israel and the settlement of Ariel prohibit both Palestinians and many Muslims from entry, the press release noted, any academic cooperation undertaken with Ariel University is, by definition, unavailable to the University of Utah's many Muslim and Palestinian students, faculty, and academic personnel. The faculty also highlighted the shameful timing of the agreement. Every single university in Gaza, among which University of Utah graduates were employed, has already been destroyed in that genocide, the group said. Those institutions are the ones that could truly benefit from such a partnership with the university. In response to the questions about the MOU, Rebecca Walsh, Director of Communications at the University of Utah, told Plus 972 that this decision does not represent the University of Utah taking a position on the war in Gaza or the occupied Palestinian territories more broadly. It's worth noting that the university, as a state institution, is not allowed to take political positions. I argue if you are having partnerships with Israeli university in the midst of a genocide, that is a political position. You're basically saying, I don't give a shit. That's what you're saying. Whether or not you think it's political, well, not even if it's a political thing, but morally, what does that say? Like, you're willing to form a partnership with the very state that's currently killing Palestinians. And they'll get into this later, but it's one thing if you have partnerships with both. That would be one thing. But you can't have partnerships with both given that all universities in Gaza have been destroyed.
Yeah.
So, I would argue maybe not political, although I think it is, but moral, and I think, more especially ethical. Like, what are you doing? So that's just bullshit statement that Miss Walsh made regarding that. So, but it's definitely a bias. So, but anyway, Walsh sent a link to the University of Utah's Global Inventory of Academic Activity Related to Palestine, which only included a small number of faculty publications, no official partnerships, and a handful of enrolled students from Palestine in recent years. Mark Lewis, Ariel spokesperson, told Plus 972 that the MOU with Utah is strictly academic, sure, and that the university has several partnerships with universities in the United States, as if that's a good thing. But anyway, in December, MIT announced the inauguration of its Collin if I said that wrong, sorry, programs for visiting Israeli scholars, an academic partnership with Israel's 9 state-recognized universities, which aims to empower Israeli scholars to get involved in collaborative, cutting-edge research, deepen academic ties, and showcase the brilliance of the startup nation. Since launching at MIT, Kalaniot's campus presence has grown. It now counts chapters at Dartmouth University, UPenn, Harvard Medical School, and Columbia. The list of Israeli partnership universities include Ariel, as well as Hebrew University and Ben Gurion University, which cooperate with the Defense Ministry to allow more soldiers in regular service and military personnel in other positions to pursue their academic studies than any other institution of higher learning, according to New Profiles report. The Defense Ministry pays over NIS 32 million, which is 9 million in US dollars, to Hebrew University, for example, to host the Talbiot program, a military academic program that trains soldiers for research and development roles in weapons manufacturing. Ben-Gurion University, on the other hand, with whom Harvard now partners, offers an accelerated undergraduate program for fighter pilots that involves close and deep cooperation between the university and the flight school. So, yeah, it's just so funny. Like, all of these things that are being promoted is dealing with surveillance, tech,
and
military.
Yep.
Mostly. Like, we only heard one thing regarding agriculture, but even that is kind of questionable considering the Great Israel Project. So this is kind of like, yeah, this is essentially the draft Israeli version. That's what this gives.
Right.
It's forcing, and again, keep in mind, I've said this many times, I think the average age for soldiers in the IDF is about 19, 20 years old. These are kids. So especially like if they don't have many options that they want to go to school, it's kind of similar here. If you're low income, the idea of going into the military might be an option for you. But so it kind of gives the idea of like, because even us, we've kind of talked about how we subsidize Israel's education, but in what way? It seems like this is one of the main, if not really the only ways. I can't say that for sure, but it's giving the illusion that it is, that the only things that that they're able to offer students if they want to make themselves viable or have a job is if you're working in surveillance or tech or in the military. And then you can use that, and they can use that to their advantage in terms of completing the Greater Israel Project. So it's sad in a sense if that's the case, because you're essentially forcing the conditions for Israeli students to consider going into these fields without the consideration morally of what this the implication of this morally in terms of you're committing a genocide. So it's just really, I think, really wicked that the government is basically almost, I would argue, almost forcing Israeli children and youth to go into these fields for for ultimately the destruction of Palestinians. So, and we in in academia are kind of liable for that too. So, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it just seems like similar to, like I said earlier, with all these universities, like, you got to realize how they're making their money,
Mm-hmm.
like they're getting it through research programs and granting and, or like wealthy donors, right? Like those are your two, like, grants, donors, tuition, right? That's how universities are making this money. And the ways they're doing that are partnering with military contracts, right? They're working with companies that work for, that have their own military contracts, like Dow Chemical, and you can go through all that list. Like, this is where especially university science departments are getting a lot of their funding from, and or big pharma, and or the people who can afford to do this kind of research and development, right? So,
right,
it's makes sense that they're partnering with IDF programs and, like, especially in that area, right? But
yeah, it's essentially a pipeline for a pipeline for Israeli youth to go into these fields.
Yeah.
So again, as I said, it's basically the draft Israel version.
Well, everyone's IDF over there, so they're all forced to serve at least a year, right?
And I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting to think about, because we haven't heard, and not to say this doesn't exist, I'm sure it is, but we're not hearing necessarily the incentives of education or I don't know, like trying to think of another industry, like education or economics, which I'm sure exists, but I'm sure like, you know, it's definitely seems like a big pull, to go into these fields where they're able to perfectly execute, you know, this plan
Yeah.
eventually and having enough essentially drones to do it. So yeah, it's just kind of funny that, like, and I think especially for us, which kind of makes sense given our low key colonialism capabilities, which people don't necessarily talk about, but like, we're low key kind of promoting that idea instead of trying to, talk about issues or try to elevate people in terms of like revolution or like radical change or like a turn away from the old in terms of the exploitation that we've done historically in the past, especially in the West. Like and I think that's kind of the danger, especially in like these universities, because we kind of talk about it, or at least in those studies, we kind of seemingly educate students to kind of think in those terms. But at the same time, if students are talking about it in those terms, they're almost penalized for it. Case in point, what you're seeing with the protests
Well, and stuff
on
at
college
Columbia,
campuses.
and yeah.
Right. So you're penalized for it, which ironically is the very place where you should be able to hear a lot of these more revolutionary ideas and having college students, university students making a stand against the empire. That's traditionally where a lot of the protests do start, is on university campuses when
Yeah.
they're exposed to different ideas and are able to kind of shape the world in terms of those ideas. So, but we talked about how Reagan kind of put his foot down on a lot of that given the 60s and the civil rights movement and all that. So,
Yeah.
but it's funny, but it's almost kind of like you can't speak, universities in the US can't speak to having a moral high ground on the issue when they are literally helping permeate the problem
Right.
in Israel. So, but anyway, let's continue that. But kind of going into what I was saying, um, but MIT's partnership, critics say, goes beyond military ties. Wynn argues that such initiatives are part of a broader strategy to use Israeli academia as a tool for Hasbara, or pro-Israel propaganda, to attempt to subjugate the Israeli narrative and reframe the facts of apartheid that are very obvious for all to see. The MIT program, for instance, aims to reflect and embrace Israel's diverse demographics in the selection of its participating scholars, whose presence on a US campus will contribute to a better understanding of their country. As MIT strengthens its relationship with Hebrew University, Israel killed over 1,000 academics who once were associated with universities in Gaza, from presidents to deans, professors, and students. I'm in favor of academic collaborations in general, but when Palestinian society is being systematically attacked, why not do the opposite? Said Richard Solomon, a doctoral student and member of the MIT Coalition for Palestine. Why not deepen relationships with the Palestinian community? In response to questions from Plus 972 on its academic collaborations, MIT referenced the Kalaniot program's website and the launch of the Global MIT at Risk Fellows Program Palestine in December 2024, a 2-year pilot initiative to bring 5 scholars from Palestine to MIT each semester for training and mentorship by MIT faculty member. Gee, and I wonder how many Israeli students are able to participate in the programs that MIT is offering, and a 2-year pilot at that. Like, so this is just a kind of like a liberal way of kind of both siding the problem.
Well, we gave them their crumbs,
right,
is what it sounds like to me. So,
right. Um, The faculty leaders have expressed their support for hosting both programs, said Sarah McDonald. I'm sure a lot of them were pro-Israeli faculty. But because, again, if I was faculty, I would be opposed to having Israel doing anything at all, especially if you're not doing anything to the same equity level as what you could do for Palestinians. Oh, go back. I'm not done with that paragraph. The faculty leaders have expressed their support for hosting both programs, said Sarah McDonald from the Institute Office of Communications in an email statement.
We hear you. We see you.
Move. There we go. Down the street from MIT, Harvard had come under increasing pressure from Republicans and Harvard's former president, Lawrence Summers, to end its partnership with Dissent over the student government's alleged ties to Hamas. Earlier this year, can you zoom in, please? After agreeing to establish a formal partnership with an unpacified Israeli university as part of its settlement of anti-Semitism lawsuits, gee, I wonder why it's unpacified. Harvard School of Public Health suspended its partnership with Dissent. The school often collaborated with scholars at Dissent and offered a summer course in Jordan focused on Palestinian health. This is an act of academic boycott of Palestinian universities, said Amir, who was forced to flee Gaza and is now a visiting researcher at Cambridge University. They are sending a message that they consider Palestinian students, academics, and institutions as disposable. Their lives are not equal. According to Wynn, the disparity between Israeli institutions' close ties with U.S. universities and the marginalization of Palestinian counterparts has had tangible consequences. The Israeli state has intentionally isolated Palestinian academics, she told Plus 972. It destroyed their universities, impoverished their resources, and attempted to prevent them from having exchanges with the rest of the international academic community. Less than a month into Israel's assault on Gaza, following the Hamas attacks on October 7th, students across U.S. campuses began mobilizing to protest Israel's aerial bombardment and demand divestment from companies tied to the occupation and Israel's military. So I hope all of that, of what I just read before, kind of makes sense, a little more sense now, in terms to why college students were protesting, like for colleges and universities to divest from Israel, which would include possibly cutting ties with their partnerships that they have with Israeli universities in terms of, like their complicity in the genocide that's occurring. So now hopefully that gives you a little more broader picture of that. However, Israeli university presidents were quick to counter the effort, of course. The heads of all 9 state-recognized Israeli universities sent a joint message to their U.S. counterparts expressing concern that college campuses had become, quote-unquote, breeding grounds for anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiments, which they attributed to a naive and biased understanding of the conflict. Sure. Scroll down.
Where? That's it.
Oh, that's it? Okay. Okay. Then, in April 2024, the same group of university had suggested in a separate letter to U.S. university presidents that extreme situations may require measures beyond the conventional tools available to university administrations, which could be read as an endorsement of deploying law enforcement against their own students. So again, this all happened under who?
Yep.
Not Trump. So between mid-April and mid-July 2024, more than 3,000 people were arrested or detained on U.S. campuses. Again, this happened under Biden, not Trump. Universities also disciplined students internally, banning groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, along with Jewish Voice for Peace, issuing suspensions and expulsions, withholding diplomas, and a spat of new rules and tightening restrictions on protests and speech. The repression is continuing as students prepare to return to campus for the fall semester, which is starting now in many schools. At the end of July, Columbia informed nearly 80 students that they face suspensions of up to 3 years or expulsion for their involvement in campus protests and encampments. But though such measures have created a chilling effect, they have not distinguished Jewish student calls for divestment, nor have they increased support for Israel on college campuses. Quite the opposite. An extensive report released by the Jewish People Policy Institute this month warns that the academic field of Israel studies is increasingly becoming a pariah field and on the brink of extinction. Good. The report notes that the Israel Institute, the primary organization funding short-term professorships and campus programming in Israel studies, has significantly scaled back its operations, apparently due to budget constraints. Meanwhile, the 2022 decision by the US-based Middle East Studies Association to boycott Israeli institutions effectively severed its ties with the Association for Israel Studies, whose members are largely affiliated with Israeli universities.
Yeah.
So some positive news, but I think just overall, like, this goes deep. And hopefully, as I said, this kind of gives a more broader picture for our audience and our family. And we've talked about this like in the past, but probably not in this way. But hopefully it gives you guys a better idea as to why college students were protesting in generally, especially what we given the information that we gave. This is why. Because it's very unequitable that they're offering all this stuff to Israeli students of them coming here, or Israeli students being able to be offered, again, drafts, I would argue, but kind of like what we do here in terms of offering perks for the military, offering some perks in terms of being associated with any military or surveillance programs that will help accelerate the destruction of Palestinians. And given what you reported about in terms of their education, that makes a lot of sense in terms of, if they're propagandized into thinking this way, then of course they will want to go into the military to essentially have the opportunity to hurt Arabs. So but again, this is kind of promoted through education, which as a teacher, I'm kind of disgusted by, because this is not what education is supposed to elevate, not destroy. So the idea that they're using, again, these are children, these are children who are, doing these things and are making these decisions, but given the, I'll call it the education complex, or the Israeli education complex, with our support to help facilitate this. So really, this is not so much even in terms of the physical, in terms of like war and all that. This is a mental issue, because this is the kind of stuff that is being kind of force fed onto Israeli students from young, which perpetuates into, and especially like, and we probably should look into, like, I'm sure there's some perks that they get in terms of being in the IDF. I'm fairly certain. But if that's favorable to a lot of students, but then, if it's not, and again, I don't know, and that's something that we could look at more as well. Like, if there are any other perks for going into something like education or law, which I'm sure there is, especially if it kind of benefits Israel from what they're doing, then, it's not even so much the government that really we should have an issue with, but we've talked about this before. Education in so many ways can influence governmental policy. So we're seeing that here in the case of Israel, that this is led by academia, which is meant to be a place where you should be uplifting radical ideas, not colonialist ideas that are leading to the destruction of people. So that's my issue with all of this. But it's very interesting to think about it in terms of the back and forth in terms of academia here and in Israel, which hasn't been mentioned in media. So this is just another angle that I think is interesting to explore about why this is happening. Like, this is a matter of, again, as I said, the mind and how you're cultivating those minds towards the greater plan. And, essentially brainwashing. Yeah, that's what it is. Brainwashing children in order to get this done. And they don't know. And I don't want to say they don't know any better. But if you're kind of grown up in that environment and you have no other way, then it makes sense that you're going to have teenagers basically being like, oh, I want to be in the military, surveillance, and all this kind of.
Right. Yeah,
Especially
someone
if they get
knows.
the opportunity possibly to come to the US to study. So,
Yeah.
But any other thoughts before we close?
No, not really. Just sounds about, par for the course for our universities. So, yee. But anything else?
No, I think, I got mad at you for, in a sense, because this is basically going to be like a F Israel
Yeah.
stream. But so I guess we'll add it to the playlist, I guess. But you can watch all of our clips. And we don't talk about Israel all the time, although I feel we do a lot. We have other segments and streams that you can go back and watch, which actually a lot of you are doing, by the way. So thank you so much for that. You're going back into the archives and watching old clips.
Yeah.
But in order to see those clips and our old streams, that we don't have to depend on YouTube, hopefully they don't pull the plug on us at any point, although we kind of suspect they might at some point. You can scan the QR code that you see on your screen, or you could type in the Ko-fi link that you see at the bottom of your screen to support us financially and be able to talk about stories like this. Or if you're in the YouTube chat, if you want to donate and you forget the link, type in !donate, all one word, and the Ko-fi link will pop up. You click on it, and then you can give as much as you want. Anything as low as $1 will help us. And of course, as we say, this kind of money is tight these days. So as much as we love the money, we also want people to take care of themselves. So if you want to support us, the free way is by liking and subscribing to the channel. Make sure you chat, because YouTube does some mess that they unsubscribe people at times. And then share our clips and our streams to help fight the suppression that we see on YouTube. And make sure you leave a comment. So what's your opinion in terms of academia kind of influencing the genocide from both the side of Israel and the US? And do you think it's equitable that Israel is able to send probably as many students as they can to take part in the resources that we're able to offer here, but not to Palestinians? And I have a theory as to why that's the case. Unfortunately, I won't be able to talk about it here, at least if you're watching it as a segment. So, but let us know what you think. Like, why do you think it's so one-sided that the U.S. is allowing Israeli students to come and study, but not necessarily Palestinians, or at least a very small amount? And thanks for watching.